All right, let's dive right into this one. Picture this. It's the dead of night. The sky is completely choked with these pitch-black clouds, and you've got jagged streaks of lightning lighting up a terrifyingly dark forest. We're on the outskirts of a small village in Bihar, India, and standing right there, just looming in the shadows, is this decrepit, old ruin. The locals, they just call it the Cursed Mansion. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack this absolutely fascinating piece of village folklore. It is this perfect mix of a spine-tingling horror story and a surprisingly deep tale of tragedy and, ultimately, redemption.
So, the absolute core of why this village was so paralyzed with fear came down to just one single warning. The locals firmly believed that an entity, specifically a Pishachini, which, if you're not familiar with Indian folklore, is basically this demonic, vampiric female spirit, was living in that abandoned mansion. The legend was super clear about this. She was a predator, and she was actively hunting literally anyone foolish enough to wander near her turf after the sun went down. I mean, just imagine growing up with that terrifying warning echoing in your head every single night.
Okay, let's set the stage. Chapter 1, The Cursed Mansion's Legend.
Now, to really understand how this whole thing unfolds, we have to look at the isolated, creepy setting of these ruins. Because the mansion was avoided by everyone, it had this aura of absolute dread, which totally allowed the legend to just fester unquestioned. But then, enter our protagonist, Arjun. He is a stark contrast to the rest of the terrified village. He's educated, he's incredibly brave, and he is deeply, deeply skeptical of anything supernatural. He literally looks at all these rumors of the Pishachini and just sees baseless superstition. So what does he do? He actually makes a bet. He tells his terrified friends that he's going to walk right into that mansion in the dead of night and prove once and for all that this monster simply isn't real.
Which brings us right into Chapter 2, The Midnight Dare. So, against literally everyone's advice, Arjun ventures out into the darkness armed with nothing but a single flashlight. As he gets closer to the towering ruins, the atmosphere instantly shifts. A heavy, unnatural, freezing cold wind suddenly whips through the air. He walks up and finds the massive main door just sitting there, half open. He gives it a little push, and it swings wide with this incredibly loud, drawn-out creak. Stepping into the pitch-black hallway, his flashlight is just barely cutting through the darkness. And then, he hears it, a distant, echoing sound of a woman crying. He actually calls out, "Who is it?" but gets absolutely nothing back. Following that chilling sound, he walks into a room where his beam catches this old portrait on the wall. It's a beautifully painted girl, but here's the thing. Her eyes seem to be unnaturally glowing in the dark. Okay, the tension right here is just unbearable. While Arjun is staring intensely at this eerie painting, trying to make sense of why these eyes are glowing, he suddenly hears the very distinct sound of footsteps directly behind him. He whips around, pointing his flashlight right into the void, but there's absolutely no one there. And in that exact terrifying second of confusion, crash! The heavy portrait drops off the wall and shatters violently right across the stone floor. I mean, talk about a profound chill running down your spine.
And that drops us right into Chapter 3, Facing the Pishachini.
So Arjun's desperately trying to rationalize this. He's telling himself, it's just the wind. It's an old, drafty house. But deep down, a primal alarm is just ringing in his head. He can physically feel the weight of someone staring at him. Slowly, really dreading what he might actually find, he turns his flashlight toward a dark corner, and his blood runs completely cold. A stark white silhouette is standing there, completely still. It was a girl, but definitely not a normal one. She had this long, unkempt black hair completely hiding her face, a torn white dress that literally seemed to float in the stagnant air, and eyes that glowed this piercing blood red in the darkness. "Who are you?" Arjun asks, and his voice, which was unshakable before, is now trembling with just raw fear. The entity just looks at him and smiles. But it wasn't a human smile. It revealed a row of incredibly sharp, terrifying, vampire-like teeth. As she speaks this terrifying warning out loud, Arjun's heart is just pounding out of his chest. His survival instincts are fully kicking in, screaming at him to run, but he can't. His legs are entirely paralyzed, just glued to the stone floor by sheer terror. And the Pishachini slowly, deliberately, begins to float right toward him, closing the distance in the dark. But then, wow, the entire narrative just flips completely on its head. The bloodthirsty monster stops. That terrifying smile fades away, replaced by genuine sorrow, and thick tears actually begin to stream from her glowing red eyes. She looks at a completely stunned Arjun and she begs for his help.
Suddenly, this demonic predator from the village folklore is revealed to be a prisoner of her own tragic existence. So what really happened? Her real name was Nisha. She was just an ordinary, innocent girl who fell deeply in love with the village landlord's son. But the cruel landlord utterly despised the match, so under totally false pretenses, he lured Nisha to this very mansion and brutally murdered her. As she died, she screamed for justice, and her soul actually became chained to the walls. Over the decades, that immense trauma, that pain, and that burning anger literally warped her human soul into the horrifying Pishachini. To finally find peace, Nisha tells Arjun that the only way to free her is to unearth her buried bones.
All right, let's head into Chapter 4, The Dark Basement. Nisha guides him to this terrifying, hidden underground tunnel that is just choked with decades of thick dust and massive spiderwebs. Arjun drops to his knees in the dirt. But the second his hands actually unearth the old buried skeleton, a massive explosion of supernatural chaos erupts. The entire mansion starts shaking violently, almost like an earthquake. Horrifying, ear-piercing screams start echoing through the pitch-black basement. And these dark, terrifying shadow spirits suddenly materialize straight out of the walls, lunging at Arjun, completely desperate to stop him from breaking the curse. But he refuses to give up. Gripping the bones tightly, he sprints up the stairs and bursts out the front doors just as a massive structural collapse totally obliterates the mansion right behind him.
Having barely survived the night, Arjun doesn't waste a single moment. The very next day, he enlists the help of the local village priest. Together, they very respectfully perform the final, sacred funeral rites for Nisha. Once the fire had done its work, Arjun gently gathered her ashes and released them into the flowing holy waters of the river Ganges, which finally fulfilled the ancient supernatural requirements to break this curse.
Which brings us to our conclusion. Chapter 5, Redemption and Peace.
It is such a beautifully stark contrast when you think about it. We literally move from the claustrophobic terror of a crumbling, haunted basement at midnight to this divine, peaceful warmth of a holy fire burning by the riverbank at sunrise. The dark chapter of the cursed mansion had finally been closed. And not by a warrior fighting a monster, right? But by a compassionate young man who just listened to a victim's trauma. That very night, as Arjun slept, he had this incredibly vivid dream. The glowing red eyes and vengeful darkness, completely gone. Instead, Nisha appeared as she truly was, a beautifully ordinary, radiant girl surrounded by peace. She looked at Arjun, smiled a warm, totally human smile, and whispered, "Thank you. You have liberated me." And with that, she vanished forever.
After that day, the terrifying supernatural events at the mansion completely stopped. The village was finally safe. But, the folklore hasn't entirely disappeared, it just evolved. Today they say that if you visit those quiet ruins on a rainy night, the howling winds are gone. Instead, you just might hear the sweet, soft voice of a woman, echoing through the wet stones, whispering a gentle, "Thank you." It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other monsters out there are simply waiting for someone brave enough to listen to their story? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.